Hi everyone, and welcome to Planning for an Inclusive Future, Youth Leading and Innovating for Peaceful Change with the Canadian Coalition for Youth, Peace and Security and FHI 360. We're glad to be at this year's annual PeaceCon conference hosted by the Alliance for Peacebuilding. My name is Katrina Leclerc, and I am a co-founder of the Canadian Coalition for Youth, Peace and Security and a PhD student here based in Canada. I'll be your moderator today, and we're looking forward to having you in our session. First, despite our best efforts, as you may have noticed, there may be some technical issues going on during the session. If you have any technical or logistical issues, please send us your questions to organizers via the general chat box. If you have any comments, we encourage you to ask your questions or give us your feedback as the session goes along. And so please also insert those in the chat box. At different times, we will invite participants to speak, to share their experiences and thoughts. If you'd like to speak during the plenary session, raise your hand by clicking on the small icon of a person raising their hand found on the right side of your navigation bar, next to the full screen icon. If you cannot locate this, please ask in the chat and someone will be happy to help. Once we give you the floor, you can unmute yourself and turn your video on if you'd like to speak. We also encourage you to engage on social media using the hashtag PeaceCon2020 and making sure you tag at Canada_YPS and at FHI360. We want to amplify your perspectives and hear what you have to say. So let's get started. First, I'd like to say happy 5th anniversary of the UN Security Council Resolution 2250 on youth, peace, and security. We're very excited to be hosting today this conversation on the anniversary date of 2250, which marks the first resolution on youth, peace, and security, which was adopted in 2015. This brings on another added value to the youth work that has been going on around the world and recognizes young people as active change makers, agenda shifters, and peace builders. The Youth, Peace, and Security Agenda, as its adopted form and framework under the Security Council, has three primary resolutions. The first is the 2250 resolution, which was adopted in December 2015, which is why we're celebrating its birthday today. And this one has 5 major pillars. I like to say that the Youth, Peace, and Security Agenda, especially 2250, is all about protection and participation. It ensures that young people are respected and recognized as youth peace builders and as essential agenda shapers and agents of change in our peace and security and peace processes around the world. It also recognizes and demands young people to be at the decision-making table in terms of peace processes and different peace-building measures and initiatives. There's also Resolution 2419 and Resolution 2535, which was adopted this past July. 2535 is particularly relevant to us because it calls for larger partnerships. It is the most action-oriented youth, peace, and security resolution, and I would argue one of the most action-oriented peace and security resolutions that we have, which calls on significant partnerships with other agendas, such as the Women, Peace, and Security Agenda, and recognizes the role of young people and young women in different decision-making spaces and in on-the-ground implementation of peace and security measures. By recognizing the role of young peace builders, we can make sure that peace and security is recognized and inclusive, that all of our intersectionalities, both as young people within our different genders, ethnicities, backgrounds, social and economic backgrounds as well, are included and recognized and also uplifted in our work in YPS and overall in peace. So today's session will be in 3 parts. The First, we'll hear from our speakers on electoral violence, access to information, gang violence, and financing. The second part will be a breakout session where we'll be dividing you into 3 main breakout sessions to talk about youth, peace, and security now at 5 years old and what you see as important for youth, peace, and security 5 years beyond. The third section of our event will be a section where we want to hear particularly from you on your recommendations and a discussion on what youth peace and security means to you and how you may be feeling encouraged or challenged by this anniversary today. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to our first speaker. I'm going to introduce, and I'm happy to introduce, Grace, who is a 24-year-old Zambian who is passionate about youth-led action on governance issues and is currently a policy and research specialist for Be Relevant, an NGO advancing the agenda for youth involvement in governance and leadership in Zambia. So Grace, could you please tell us how you have contributed to building peace and security in your community, and who and what motivated and enabled you to become a leader for peaceful change? Over to you, Grace.
Thank you, Katrina. I'm so excited to be here, so excited to be part of this conversation. I believe that it's very, very important for us as young people to be at the forefront of these kinds of conversations, because ultimately, whatever the outcomes are, whatever the big decisions are that are made, we are the ones who bear the brunt of it the most. Also because we are the ones who have the most time left on the planet. So, as has been said, my name is Grace Gondwe, and I'm involved with doing work around curbing electoral violence here in Zambia. I have been involved with leadership from as far back as my university days. I got involved with student leadership, and I enjoyed it so much because I felt like I was part of something bigger, part of making a difference. And so when I came out of the university and came to the quote unquote real world, I realized that there was a disconnect, because I saw that there was no room. I felt like there was no room for young people to contribute, young people to connect, and so on and so forth. And so I was able to be privileged to become part of the program that is being run by SHI 360 called the Youth Lead Activity. And it was there that I was able to connect with other young people who were of a like mind and who were also looking for opportunities and looking for ways that they could contribute. And one of the things that we realized was that we are actually in the run-up to general elections here in Zambia. We are actually in a period of just doing voter registration and things like that. And we realized that over the last few years, there's been a spike in the amount of electoral violence taking place around by-elections, around political rallies, and so on and so forth. And so we sat down and began to ask ourselves questions. Why is it that, because even research has shown that a lot of the times when young people are involved in politics and so on and so forth, they are being used as pawns for electoral violence. So we began to ask ourselves, why is it so? What is making young people feel like the only way that they can participate is through what we call in Zambia here cadarism, and getting involved in violence and beating up people from other political parties. And so we sat down and we came up with a project which we called Operation Chapamu. We conducted background research with young people. We asked them questions about how they felt about the governance process, about the electoral process. And not surprisingly, the outcome was that young people felt excluded. They felt that there was no room for them at the table. And so we set about to design a program that would help young people to feel included, that would help young people to understand that there is a way that they can contribute, that there's a way that they can engage and participate in governance that went beyond participating in violence or cadarism or whatever the case may be. And so we designed this program. And there are a number of things that we have done that I'm glad to say I feel are big contributors to securing peace and security for us. And I'll just mention a few of those. But on a high level, an advocacy level, what we did was we conducted a symposium with young people from all over the country, and we got together and just said, what do young people want the electoral experience to be for them? What do young people want to see in the run-up to the elections? And so we got everybody together and had a conversation about that, and we came up with an advocacy tool document, which is called the Dream 2021, which we are using as an advocacy tool to talk to political parties, to talk to civil society. This is what young people want. How can we partner with young people to make this dream a reality? And then on a more micro level, on a more grassroots level, we trained a group of young people to go out into the communities and just talk to other young people and make them aware that there is more that they can do than just to be involved in violence. That there's a way that they can engage in governance. That there's a way that they can participate in civic engagement processes and so on beyond just being news and scattered. So we train those young people, and that's one of the things that I'm most proud of, because I know that those young people will reach the most people in those communities. So that's another thing. And then the other thing that we were also able to be fortunate to do is we have partnered with different organizations. We've partnered with FHI 360, of course. We've partnered with the National Youth Development Council, with COMESA, and most importantly, the Electoral Commission of Zambia, because they are the ones who oversee the electoral process. And we know that if we have their support in the work that we are doing, then we know that we'll be making a good thing. So those are the few things that I would say are the contributions that we've made. There are a number of things that have created an environment that has enabled us to do these things. And I'll just share one or two of those things. The first one for me that I found to be the most important is just the proactive attitude of young people themselves. It was a very, very fulfilling experience for me to be able to connect with other young people who saw that there were difficulties, who saw that people in communities were not feeling safe anymore. People wanted to participate in political rallies, people wanted to engage, community leaders and so on and so forth, but they didn't feel safe because they felt like if they went and spoke to these people, they would be attacked by some young people from an opposition political party or something like that. So just seeing young people themselves, the passion that they have and their proactiveness and their energy to take initiative, I believe that this is a very, very important ingredient to just driving the peace and security agenda. And then the other thing is also that really helped us is the support from these civil society organizations. We wouldn't have been able to reach organizations like the Electoral Commission of Zambia. We wouldn't have been able to reach organizations like COMESA if we didn't have support from FHI 360. So I believe that young people do want to do more, but I believe that they can do more if they have support to amplify their voice. We have something to say. We want to do something. But if we can have support from these kinds of organizations, that can make it better. In as far as things that hinder young people from participating, there's the usual, it's not just an assumption, research has shown, and even we saw from our experience, that young people feel like there's no room for them. And then from my experience here in Zambia, there's a very tokenistic approach to involving young people in these spaces, these governance, these conversations about peace and security. They will bring us in just so that they can say that they'll bring us in. In Zambia here, for example, there's only less than a 1% representation of young people in parliament. So that's very, very discouraging. So those are the few things that I have to share, and that's kind of the experience that I have from here in Zambia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grace. That was really helpful for us to get us started. And it's so true that political participation of young people starts within the electoral process, and the work that you're doing in Zambia is so crucial to ensure that the protection of these rights and of young people generally is important, because it's so crucial for strong and democratic processes that young people are truly involved. And this is one of the key pillars of youth, peace, and security, as I mentioned before. Now I'd like to introduce Sophia, who will speak to us a little bit about access to information and how that is relevant to the youth, peace, and security agenda. So Sophia is a journalism and human rights student and co-founder of the Canadian Coalition for Youth, Peace, and Security. Her experience in journalism provides her with a unique perspective on access to information and technology, a barrier youth face whose impact has been heightened by the COVID-19 pandemic. And there is no doubt that the digital divide is real. And so, Sophia, how can you please share with us your reflections in terms of access to information and how that's relevant to the Youth Peace agenda and your experience with that?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Katrina, for that introduction. And thank you so much for everyone who's here joining us today. I'm really, really excited to have a chance to speak to you all a little bit more about access to information. So like Katrina mentioned, I am involved. I'm one of the co-founders of the Canadian Coalition for Youth, Peace, and Security, and I have been involved with a number of youth initiatives over the past few years. And one of the biggest issues that I noticed, of course, is having access to information. And I think what access to information looks like, I mean, that can look like lots of different things, right? And we can think about it in terms of having access to technology, having access to resources, having access to actual, information, written information or videos, etc. And I think all of this has really been it's become even more pertinent. This discussion has become even more pertinent under the COVID-19 pandemic, like Katrina mentioned in my introduction. And we can think about this in terms of making sure that everybody has access to fair and accurate information about the COVID-19 vaccine or the virus itself. Everybody has resources, multilingual resources, I would say, are even more important to make sure that they can keep themselves and others safe. So really just making sure that everybody has information. So that's kind of, I want you guys to think about that in terms of why having access to information, to equal and fair and accurate information is really, really important to this conversation. And if you think about it in terms of youth peace and security or peace and security movements, as somebody who is a journalist or studying to be a journalist, I really, I would say I have an interesting perspective when it comes to understanding the importance of, having access to information. When you read something or when you're watching a video, you want to make sure that you walk away having more answers than questions. You don't want to be thinking, what does this mean as a whole? And so if you think about this in terms of youth peace and security or youth involvement in peace building, one of the biggest barriers that I've seen that youth and myself have faced over the past few years is just making sure that a lot of the information that we're having surrounding, how we can be involved or what our role is in the peace building, movement in general. And a lot of the information surrounding peace and security, of course, comes from the Youth Peace and Security Agenda. I'm just going to call it YPS as we go on so that I don't have quite a mouthful each time. But a lot of the information surrounding YPS, specifically the YPS agenda, the different, issues under the umbrella of YPS, they're not really, I would argue, written or shared with the audience of youth in mind. They're really, if you read this information as somebody who has been involved in the sector for several years, it will be very easy to comprehend using these terms that a lot of people are using. You're very familiar with this language, but for youth who are just sort of getting involved, who are just stepping into the door of peace and security, these are terms that they're not familiar with. We don't know what it means. We don't understand, sort of what's happening when we're reading this information, and that can really just cause people to sort of be alienated from this as a whole. And I think if we're thinking about this, I don't think that this is intentional in terms of, purposely excluding youth, but I think it sort of speaks to the fact that youth are not having a seat at the table when it comes to making these decisions, when it comes to actually writing these resources, for example, when you don't have the feedback from youth and it's not written, it's not youth led, we can kind of see how that can really make a lot of youth fall through the cracks, so to speak. And, I think there's quite a few different reasons why I find access to information so important and what can happen when youth don't have access to information in terms of peace and security, right? So, first of all, this is the big one where us youth don't really understand what the YPS agenda may be, but at the same time, we're not really aware of it at all. And I think, given that YPS it's fairly new, it's not something that a lot of people and even a lot of governments have been, actively spreading around this information. It's not something that has a huge place, as we've seen over the past couple of years with the Women, Peace and Security agenda, which has become, thankfully, a really, really huge aspect in a lot of different foreign policy and just sort of local governance as well. But we don't really see that with youth, peace and security yet. Hopefully this is something that can change over the next couple of years, but because it's not something that's very well known, we don't see a lot of youth knowing about it, right? And then we don't understand kind of what it is, what it means. Really what it aims to sort of, I guess, solve or how youth can be involved in the peace building process in the first place. And I guess to that point, we sort of see how the work that youth are doing, the initiatives, the grassroots movements, whatever the work they're doing, whether it's for youth empowerment or related to the electoral process or climate change, et cetera, we aren't able to see kind of how that work that we're doing as youth fits into, I guess you could say, the peace building process. And a conversation I had with somebody, I was telling them about my involvement with youth peace and security, and they were really shocked because they told me, I thought, peace and security was only like disarmament. I thought you had to have, or, like nuclear weapons and things like that, and those kind of conversations. And I thought you have to be really, really experienced to be part of those conversations, right? And so I think youth kind of see this as something that's really inaccessible to them as a whole, because they don't have this information in the first place to get involved. And really not, I think, I'm speaking in the context of Canada here, right? As someone who's born and raised in Canada, living in Canada and seeing the work that youth are doing. But I don't think it's really, out of pocket for me to say that. I'm sure wherever you are, whatever country, youth are doing really huge movements in your local community, global community. And, when youth aren't able to see how that work that they're doing fits into peace and security and peace building as a whole, I think that's really a lost opportunity for youth themselves and also for the peace building process as a whole. And if we're kind of thinking about, why, I guess, why this is so important and what kind of the biggest ramifications are, we can kind of see how it really limits who is involved in the peace building process in the first place. When we kind of say, okay, well, I'm not well qualified, I'm not educated enough to know about peace building. They may really see a lot of people who maybe don't speak English as their first language or don't have that background information in policy making or international relations. Those are sort of the fields that would most likely have those conversations about YPS. We can sort of see how it really limits the amount of youth who are doing really great work, hands-on work in their community, who should be just as involved in these conversations around peace building, and really need to, I guess, have the tools to recognize how the work that they're doing is a part of the broader peace and security agenda as a whole. And I think that's probably the biggest argument that I'm kind of making, or something that I reflected upon when looking around me. And I think, something that Grace said in her wonderful reflection is that young people, kind of want to take the lead. Young people want to get involved, but they feel excluded. And, that's feeling of not feeling like you have a room at the table. And I think a lot of that comes from not being, having necessary information. When you kind of if you have to really fight your way to get a seat at the table at the first place, when you show up there, you want to make sure that you know everything that's going on. You want to make sure that you're well educated and have the resources and tools to contribute to these conversations that are taking place at whether it's, a local community level or a larger scale meeting. And so when you don't have that actual information to be prepared and show up, it's really, it's not really, I think it's really a way for you to not actually want to be involved in this in the first place, because you don't have these necessary tools. And so I guess I don't want to take up too much time today, but what I'm trying to say, we're going to have a chance to talk about this a bit more in our discussion groups, and I'm really, really excited for that. But something that I'll kind of leave you with for now is, thinking about how youth can be involved. How are youth expected to be involved in the peace building process? Something, of course, that is geared towards, having a better future for us and our entire world, if we're not actually having the tools to access and really engage with the information surrounding the peace building process in the first place.
Thank you so much, Sophia. That was very meaningful and important. We can see that the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated a lot of the digital divide and the misinformation among young people, but it's certainly not the first time that we hear about this, and honestly, probably not the last, unfortunately. And so it's so important to be raising this and seeing how we can develop strategies to ensure access to information and accessible information at that is prioritized for young people to be engaged and be able to fully participate. Now I'm going to turn over to our next speaker, which is Rashid Morris. Rashid is at the age of 19. Rashid became a violence interrupter working with Peace Management Initiative in Jamaica. Since then, he has treated more than 60 gang-based conflicts and referred 50 youth into transition programs away from gang activity. So, Rashid, how have you contributed to building peace and security in your community, in addition to what I've already mentioned, and who and what motivated you and enabled you to become a leader for peaceful change?
Okay, good afternoon. I'm so thankful to be on this podium to speak about my story on how to build peace. My name is Rashid Morris. I am a violence interrupter from Anatown. In my community is a violent area, also at a garrison in Jamaica. I grew up in a volatile area called Anatown. Yeah, a lot of violence happening in Anatown. lot of gun shooting, murders, cause since from in a lifetime I grew up in Anatown, and more than 100 people I know has lost their life by gang violence, and it have been many years going on and on and on, and the community has split in two. The community is split in two, mean some person can go over one side, some person can't go on the other side. So that have a life threatening on people because no trust is in the community. The youths them lack of exposure. I think the youth them lack of exposure. The community. The impact on the community. The impact in the community. The youth. Good. Can I start over? Right, the record. Alright. Can I start over? My name is Rashid Morris. I'm from Anatown. And my community is a violent area. I am a violence interrupter. As always trying to get warring gangs in my community to keep the peace. Means as I hear that a war popping up in my area, as soon as I hear that a war are popping up, I get on the corner to hear what the youths them have to say, get them on a peaceful and calm. And so much murder and death take place in my community. Till I also lose my father one day going to work. He lose his life, get one shot in his head. So I know what it feel when a youth, and most youth in my community grew up without a father figure. So I know what it is like. I lose my father when I was age 12 doing GSAT. So I know I couldn't focus to have bring a trauma in my life. Like I think because he has friend, when he died, he has friend who come around told me that they know the killer, and when I get big, show me gun. So I know influence. A lot of youth going through this influence who lost a father. Most youth in the garrison lost their father as well as me. So I am a big example to show to the youths the right way and to broaden their knowledge. So life is there. Cause peer impact. What changed me? What changed me? My family, and PMI coming to my community, and they show me how to forgive and to keep the peace and to how to deal with the youth. So yeah, no, I'll start over. After my father died, it has traumatized me. Let's start from what PMI did. Let's start with what PMI did. How you got involved in PMI. That was what PMI did. My family and the organization PMI supported me, influenced me not to choose violence. They trained me, show me how to be a better person, how to control and care for people. They provide mentorship. don't know how to finish. I don't know how to finish. This is the work I do. I know how to keep the youth safe in my community. Yeah. All right, thanks to everyone.
Thank you, Rashid. Thank you for sharing your story with us and for being willing to explain a little bit more about your own story and how you've been able to have mentors and others who were supportive of you in your journey, and how you are now supporting others in their journey to choosing peace over violence. It's very important for us to hear about these perspectives, and especially in the context of youth peace and security, where a lot of people, young people especially, are vulnerable in their young ages and can be led or influenced into choosing violence. And so it's so important to hear about your experience and how you've chosen peace and how you're helping others choose peace. Now, I'd like to turn the floor over to Fiona Vowell. Fiona works on research and advocacy with the Canadian Coalition for Youth, Peace and Security, of which she's also a co-founder. Her experience with economic justice and recovery draws on her studies and engagement in various advocacy and community-level efforts, both locally and internationally. Now, Fiona, can you please share with us your reflections on how economic stability is important for the youth peace agenda, youth peace and security agenda, and for young peace builders more generally?
Thank you so much, Katrina. So my name is Fiona Vowell, and I am a steering committee member and one of the co-founders of the Canadian Coalition for Youth, Peace and Security. I'm currently finishing my bachelor's degree in human rights and conflict resolution at the University of Winnipeg in Manitoba, Canada, and that's where I'm speaking from today. So today I'm going to discuss the pandemic's economic impact on youth, the concept of universal basic income, or also known as UBI, and kind of the idea of would UBI have a positive impact right now, and why are there so many conversations about it in local communities and also on the international stage. I also want to note that because I am Canadian, I will be speaking from that context, and a lot of some of the examples that I have are directly from Canada. So how has COVID-19 impacted youth economically? We've heard a lot about the fact that almost every country in the world is entering a recession, and it's been one of the fastest and steepest downgrades in growth projections among all global recessions since 1990. And we were talking a lot about adults and people that are losing their jobs. And for me personally, I had the luck and the privilege of not losing my job. Everyone around me did. That was basically under the age of 30 and was laid off and was not seeing the resources and the support that they needed. And so it has been estimated by the International Labor Organization that nearly 1.6 billion workers in the informal economy have or will lose their jobs, which is nearly half the global workforce at risk. So it's important to recognize that youth are part of that number. Specifically in Canada, the youth unemployment rate has increased from 10 to 32% in a period of 6 months. The International Labor Organization's Global Employment Trends for Youth 2020, which is quite a mouthful, has stated that globally, 1/5 of young people currently have what's referred to as NEET status, which means that they are neither gaining experience in the labor market nor receiving income from their work or enhancing their education or skills. So basically that they're not building their career, or they're not getting paid for the work that they're doing, which is such a huge issue for youth work. The ILO has also found that that youth aren't getting paid enough, so that 29 million young workers worldwide, which is about 55 million people, or 13%, are suffering from extreme poverty, which is defined as living on an income below $1.90 US per day, while 79 million, or 17%, live in moderate poverty, which is below $3.20 US per day. So that means that about 30% of youth working are living in defined poverty. And that's just going to further continue due to the pandemic and increase it even more. So all of these issues that the world and Canada as well has had going into the pandemic has just exacerbated this huge issue, which has led to a conversation about universal basic income. And Canada has been having a very, very poignant and national conversation about it. So universal basic income, or UBI for short, is defined by the World Bank as a transfer that is provided universally and unconditionally in cash and holds an attractive promise of change across many lines, which could be the coverage potential, fairness in social contracts, power relations in labor markets, gender equality, among others. So what that basically means is that a UBI program is to be delivered to everyone in cash with no conditions or targeting, and it would be money that would be provided either on a biweekly or monthly basis. And this has proven very challenging for many countries to adhere to. According to the World Bank, no country in the world has a universal basic income in place currently. Many have developed programs and have implemented pilot projects. However, they have not lasted. Mongolia and Iran, though, did have UBI at one point. It did not last, however. And that is no longer in place with their governments. So now kind of the question of why would UBI be beneficial for countries and specifically for youth? Basically, the pandemic has forced countries to introduce new social protection measures. And about out of 195 countries, 1,024 new social protection measures were created to cover 1.7 billion individuals in the period of about four-ish months. So that means that we do actually have the resources to support people, and we do have the people to think through these issues. Many governments set up programs that were similar to UBI in many ways. Canada specifically had the Canadian Emergency Benefit Relief. Spain has committed and is currently implementing a basic income for its poorest demographic. And there was a UBI pilot project that had started in Kenya pre-pandemic and continued throughout the pandemic. And the results of the pilot project that are coming out are basically saying that it helped people to remain financially stable. However, it also just improved their overall quality of life and their health due to the less stress of having money. With countries, individual economies, and the global economies at an all-time low, it makes sense that youth will be deeply affected by these changes, especially the thousands and thousands of youth that are entering an already competitive job market for the first time. The UBI director, the director of UBI Works, which is a not-for-profit that campaigns for UBI in Canada, states, "Seeing how fast that people went on to CERB, which is the Canadian benefit program, it shows that we had a problem going into the pandemic. And the fact that young people these days are already in a gig economy and need to work 60 to 80 hours a week doing multiple jobs is frankly a sign that our system was broken." So really what I want you to take away from this part today is that there is a major flaw to our economic systems, both nationally for me in Canada, but also internationally, and how we support youth as they are, and supporting youth in an economic way is really important for making change through the YPS agenda. As much as we can have international legislation and have countries commit to doing things, if there is no conversation about youth and economic recovery, especially for those that are working so hard, like Grace and Rashid, to implement the YPS agenda on the ground, then there will be very slow progress in the coming years. So I have some thoughts just to leave you with. What do you think? How do you think youth could be best supported for the economic recovery process? Do you think that universal basic income is part of that solution? Why or why not? And finally, the last one I want you to think about and keep for our brainstorming session is, in a best case scenario, what are the steps that your government or the international community could take to best include youth in the economic recovery? Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Fiona, for giving us all that information and updating us on what is happening in Canada in terms of finding solutions for barriers of access to young people. And we also know that most young people's advocacy and activism is actually volunteer work. And so many experience additional financial barriers to support their social justice work and important peace initiatives. We also know, as you mentioned, that most young people's organizations or youth-led networks are run on an average of less than $10,000 a year, and even those are rarely funded. And so these are additional barriers not only put on by the COVID-19 pandemic, but they were also existing prior. Now, before heading to our breakout sessions, I also neglected to let you know that if you are interested, you can also learn more from Rashid's experience by watching the Last Street documentary, which we've shared in the chat box. And I believe, if you please indulge me, Rindala, we'll share it once more in case you are interested in hearing a little bit more. And again, that is the Last Street documentary. Now, you will be divided into 3 groups where you will brainstorm together for about 20 minutes, after which we'll return to the scenery and you'll receive additional guidance, so don't worry, within your breakout sessions. And afterwards, we'd like to hear your recommendations on various topics related to youth peace and security implementation and the overall agenda. And then we'll be happy to answer some of the wonderful questions we've seen already in the chat box and have a larger discussion with you as audience members. And so I'm going to leave it at that, and we'll see you in the breakout rooms. Hi, everyone. Everyone is back. I hope these were great conversations. I hopped from one room to the other a little bit and overheard some of your contributions. These seemed fantastic. And so what I'm suggesting that we do now is that I'm going to ask our wonderful breakout room facilitators to summarize quickly some of the reflections that were shared in the breakout session, and especially on the 2 key questions of how might we better enable and support youth to take action to advance peace and security during and after the pandemic, and how can youth peace and security support us in our efforts to advance youth-led action on peace and security during and after the pandemic. All right, so what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm also going to try, if the technology permits, to screen share so that we can see the wonderful notes and we can look at them. Oh, perfect, we can see that. while you're speaking. So first up, Fiona, if you want to share with us a little bit of what's going on or what happened in the discussion in your breakout session.
Yeah, we had a really awesome conversation, which you guys can all clearly see. So for question one, one of the conversations, one of the bigger things that we kind of talked about was, having having a friend to be engaged or seeing someone else doing that can really be motivating to youth to making those changes, as well as feeling supported really was another comment, or having a personal experience that then motivated them. So that was those are the bigger ones from that one. And then the second one you wanted me to reflect on was question 3, correct? Whichever. So then some of the things that we talked about inhibiting youth was lack of compensation, access to decision makers, fear or trauma, inferiority complex. And that it's sometimes hard to access the YPS language. And then finally, the COVID-19 impact, we talked about both the positives and the negatives. So like the digital divide and the lack of access to internet. And then on the other side, we talked about how youth often have a better grasp on how to utilize technology, and that it may be difficult for youth to focus on volunteer work or things that they want to due to the economic impact and needing to support their families. And also just having to be more creative about how to organize or to do advocacy or to lobby a government, and trying to do that from an online form. So yeah, that's kind of the focus that we had in our group.
Thank you so much, Fiona. Grace, do you want to share with us your sessions, reflections, and discussions?
Yes, please. Thank you. We had an interesting conversation. We opened it with somebody slightly older, who might not necessarily fit the young people demographic, who just chipped in and said something that I think is very, very important. Just highlighting how that, in as much as it's about us as young people driving this agenda forward, that we can benefit from input and we can benefit from partnerships with the older, more experienced, more seasoned people who are working around who are doing this kind of work. As far as hindrances go, there were a few interesting ones. I think one of the ones that stood out was the aspect of lack of resources. And somebody commented, I think somebody from Canada spoke about how this is also a challenge that is being faced here. And I found that interesting because coming from where I'm coming from, I think there's just a tendency to assume that certain challenges are not being faced in these other parts of the world. So I think it was resources like lack of access to internet and just financial resources. And we also just reflected on Katrina, how you commented about how young people are doing most of this as volunteer work. And they will have to decide, do I want to volunteer or do I want to do it for the sake of getting some remuneration of some form at the end of the day. And then on the side of the impact of COVID, there was a comment that on the plus side, the pandemic is pushing us into a place where we are seeing the necessity of creating networks and creating connections and so on and so forth. And I think that was very interesting. And but also it made me think, yes, it's pushing us to create networks, but has to be virtual. And so it comes back again to the conversation about access to internet and access to information and how much access the people who need it the most have. There was also the aspect of strong networks, and I think this is something that I also highlighted as having been relevant to our experience as we were designing the project that we did, that we also capitalized on our networks, we as the young people who were designing the project. So we realized that we could influence our networks as well, and those people could in turn influence their spheres of influence. So that's generally the conversation that I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grace. I'm going to hand it over to Sophia. Sophia, to let us know or share with us a little bit of your reflections about the breakout room that you hosted.
For sure, yeah. And don't be mistaken by the sort of less number of sticky notes. We had lots of great oral conversations. I guess you didn't have the time to type it all up because there was just so much conversation going on. Anyway, essentially kind of the biggest themes that we saw and kind of discussed were just kind of related to what actual support and what good support looks like for youth. So kind of looking at it in terms of how do we properly support youth? If we think about it, who are usually involved and on the forefront of peace building or making change in the community? And it's those who are affected the most by it. For example, Rashid is telling us about his personal experience with violence in his community and why he is now a violence interrupter. So we see that usually if you're on the front lines of a movement, if you think about it in the Canadian context, or the United States context, for example, with gun violence, it's usually those who have been personally affected by it. So how can we allow them to be, a leading force in those movements, while at the same time making sure that their emotional needs are met, that they have healthy coping mechanisms, that they can continue with this work in a way that is emotionally healthy for them, right? So there's that side of things, but then there's also the side of things of how can those who are in positions of power support those youth? How can we make sure that we're giving youth the tools and resources that they need to succeed, while at the same time not making sure that we're not exploiting them or using them for our own political benefit or own political need? And kind of to that point, we saw some really great ideas about how youth kind of are not familiar with the different or may not be as familiar with different systems of change, right? So if we think about it in terms of like politics or huge global systems of change, and because of that, it could be seen as a barrier, but we also kind of saw it as a good thing, because youth, and when it comes to our imagination, the possibilities are endless for how we can enact change. And so one thing that we don't want to do when youth are involved in peace building is pushing them towards these systems that are very rigid and that have been in place for a really long time, and kind of trying to make peace building in a youth context fit into a certain system, in a rigid system, but instead kind of give youth the ability, or allow youth to continue in their ability to kind of, I guess, do youth building or peace building outside the box, right? To be coloring outside the lines and whatnot. And yeah, those are kind of like the main themes that we discussed, and just kind of making sure that there's a line between youth empowerment and just kind of using youth as a way to serve your own political agenda and your own political needs. But yeah, there were some really great conversations, and I'm really grateful to everyone who shared their thoughts in the chat.
Thank you so much, Sophia. I'm not too sure what I'm doing here. Oh, there we go. And so thank you so much. We have about 20 minutes left to our session, and we'd like to be able to answer some of your questions. And so please do put your questions in the chat. Some of you have already been very keenly and actively commenting and adding questions and feedback in the chat. One of the questions that was actually directed earlier on to you, Sophia, is someone was wondering what your thoughts were about youth who don't have access to information that is crucial to their protection when they're building peace in contexts where they're threatened. So I'll turn it to you, Sophia, if you have any thoughts on that. And if any of you, Grace, Fiona, or Rashid, also want to speak on any of the questions, please do go ahead.
Yeah, that was a really, really great question. And I think it's something that, living in Canada, you could say it's a bit easier to not have to really think about that too much in terms of the freedoms that we have of surrounding, like freedom of press and things like that. So it would be really naive of me to say that we can say whatever we want without repercussions and whatnot, but for a general context, right? So I think that's a really great point. And I don't know if I necessarily have the exact answer for you, and I'd love to hear thoughts from other people, but I did speak to, for example, somebody who's a journalism professor in Egypt, and she's talking about how it was really difficult for her to teach journalism in Egypt, where there are such tight restrictions around freedom of the press, because she's scared that the tools that she's teaching her students and the questions that she's encouraging them to ask can get them into trouble. And I think this kind of it's like a bit of a similar situation here. So we think about, we want youth to be involved in peace building. We want youth to have the information that they need, but what if the information that they need to actually be involved in peace building can actually harm them? So if we're thinking about this in the context of, let's say, like this, something that Grace was saying about electoral process. In a lot of countries, getting information and fair and accurate information about elections, we've seen in the United States and Canada how interference has resulted in an accurate election. So it'd be unfair of me to say that only happens in other countries. But regardless, I think we can kind of see what happens if you don't have fair and accurate representation or information. So I guess my biggest thing is I don't really have necessarily a great answer for you, but I think we need to find ways that youth can do that. So does that look like giving youth a safe space online, or they can have this discussion? Does this look like making sure that the information that we're spreading from a North American or a Canadian context or whatever country that's doing peace building can be spread regardless of the audience? I don't know. I'd love to hear some other thoughts about that, but those are kind of the biggest things that came to mind.
Thank you so much, Sophia. Grace, did you want to add anything in terms of questions that you might have to pose to folks that they can reflect upon and share with us via the chat?
There was an interesting question that was asked just before our breakout closed about somebody, I think, from Washington, who is working with young people to just help them to heal from trauma and just help them, and as far as like improving their mental health, and how ultimately that can lead up to them now being able to participate in forwarding the different security agenda. And I can't remember exactly what the question was. Maybe it's the person who asked it is still available. They can just type it in the chat. But I think it was an interesting question because in my context, for example, the whole conversation about mental health and dealing with trauma is very, very new. We are not so exposed to the conversation about therapy, for example, and things like that. Usually, if something is done, it's when somebody has gotten to the breaking point where they need to be hospitalized and so on and so forth. So, but I think that in thinking about it, we could actually benefit from those kinds of programs or from that kind of help, because we do better when we are coming from a place where we are home, and we are coming from a place where our own personal trauma is here. So, it would be interesting to hear. I think Safia, you guys had something close to that in the discussion more recently, so maybe you can just add to that.
Thank you, Grace. Sophia, did you want to jump on that? I saw you move. I'm not sure. No.
I was just going to say, I think Grace did a really good job of encapsulating kind of some really great thoughts. So
fantastic. Thank you. All right, we have a few questions in the chat here. So one of them is to you, Rashid, if you're up to it. So this is Robin who's asking and saying that they're curious to hear from you, Rashid, if and how you think gender, so male or female or women and men, plays a role in this. So for example, are boys and men expected to act a certain way that may make it harder for them or him and others to be effective violence interrupters? We'll just give a second for translation. Oh, Rashid, you're on mute.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Women play a big role in crime and violence as well in the community, because they carry most women would have said them like a gangster to defend them and in certain role because of the type of community them live in. So them want a gangster for talk to, because if them go right there, so a man might disrespect them or so they want somebody to defend them. So them will cause violence too as well in the community. So we put it woman and the man act a similar way.
Thank you, Rashid.
Okay.
It's great to have your perspective on it. Now, a question perhaps to any and all of you panelists is from Kelly. Kelly says, I hear that youth want a voice in the more adult organizations. I've also heard that they don't want to fit into a rigid system. If you could ask the orgs like Alliance for Peacebuilding or others for a permanent way to have your voice heard, what would it be? So perhaps I'll start with Fiona.
I think this is such a good question of, how do you balance being a part of the systems that are already in place while meeting the needs of the people that you're working with? I do not have a perfect answer. However, I think the biggest thing for me is, being able to be in the space and being able to have access to the space. So, whether or not that is a consideration that organizations take of having spots that are specifically for youth, so that we can operate within the more adult organizations or the rigid systems, and also allowing for space for growth and change and development. Because I think that's sometimes the trap that we fall into, is that we have this idea that organizations are structures that stay in place and maybe advance in their concept, but they don't advance in their structure. And so I think it's important that we are open to the evolvement of systems and how they change, especially as human rights and issues around the world are being brought to a boiling point in many countries, and conversations about all of these things are happening. So yeah, that's my roundabout answer.
Thank you, Fiona. Grace, would you like to answer?
I think I'll echo what Fiona said, that I don't know if this is the perfect answer or the right answer. But for me, hearing that question, the first thing that came to mind is any assistance or any partnership that will allow us to have our voice amplified. So is it just, like I said, for us, it was having FHI 360 seconding our project. That meant that we could go to the bigger people and say, this is what we're doing, can you support us? So if we could have Alliance for Peace say, we will partner with you on this project, already that is amplifying our voice and amplifying our reach and our influence. So opportunities to partner in a way that will amplify our voice. Because like the question says, we have something to say and we have a way that we want things done. So can we have people who want to work with us in a way that will amplify the processes that we are creating and the messages that we want to deliver?
Perfect. And then maybe one more minute, Sophia.
Yeah, I'll try to answer this the best I can. There are so many thoughts, and I think Fiona and Grace did a really good job of encapsulating just like the biggest, broadest ideas that youth have. And like Michelle said in the chat, even spaces like this where youth are given kind of a platform to speak and to share their ideas and to really have these conversations is a first great step. And I think it's really wonderful and really a testament to that sort of like youth engagement that organizations are kind of striving towards more. But I also want to say that there's we kind of have to make sure that when we're moving forward and giving youth the tools, or like having partnerships and things like that, we want to make sure that we're straying away from the tokenization of youth. So if you're saying we have a youth advisory board, and then you say, well, what do they do? And then you say, yeah, they show up to a meeting twice a year and that's it. We have youth, we're doing a great job. So we need to make sure that we really evolve past just listening to youth voices passively and actually giving them a space to do things on their own terms. If you're going to support them, I think a lot of financial support sometimes is really beneficial. And doing partnerships, like you said, it's really great to have a place to throw ideas back and forth with organizations who may have people that may have been around for longer, to kind of say, what does this look like? What does that look like? But you have to recognize as youth, we're going to make mistakes and maybe we're not going to feel like we're well qualified. So it's really about making sure that we're just straying away from that. Here we have one youth worker here, so we're a great youth org. So that's something that I would love to say. Yeah, exactly, David. Such a great thought. Power, not just presence. That's a really great thought, I think, to end on.
Perfect. Thank you. And Rashid, your recommendation on how to make sure young people are meaningfully included?
Peace process. Go. Okay. I'll get them meaningful in the process by talking to them, broaden their mind or intention, show them say better is there. So they know the good road that to tread on and low the gun, because most time we influence them, tell them that most time them not have a good meal to eat. Sometimes them will have to come, most of them older than even me. So sometimes them have to come. Sometimes I have to show them back those little stuff. Say the gun's not gonna better you sell the gun, they can take care of you and your kids them. Yeah, so tell them things like that to broaden their intention, because sometimes them lack of exposure. You get me? The lack of exposure, because I feel like that is one of the main things on love. Them not have no love because them not have a father figure to show them the way. Like me under the same situation as well, as a trauma. So them not have no love figure. And they lack of exposure. So that would carry them a far away. So tell them things like those to keep it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rashid. Now we're coming to the end of our session. I'm going to share with you a little summary visual that we've prepared for you. And so what we've heard today are among our conversations and the breakout sessions and with our wonderful panelists is that we need solidarity among young people. We need to find the commonalities to make sure that the youth, peace, and security agenda can be fully implemented and held accountable, and that member states and other governments can be held accountable to make sure that they're fully respecting and implementing their commitments. We need knowledge sharing and meaningful partnerships, intergenerational partnerships, and support to young people, especially those who are most affected by various conflicts and various issues that are pertinent to making sure that peace and security is stable in various regions, and that political support is present, but not at the expense of the tokenization of young people. We've also heard that there is lack and significant lack of funding and financing of young people, and that there's an inferiority complex almost among young people, even though they are experts in their own right. They understand the context where they live, the context where they work, and so some of them carry trauma and need some emotional support. And access to YPS also includes accessible language and accessible spaces. In terms of the COVID-19 impact, there's been an exasperation of the lack of access to internet and the digital divide, but there's also been many opportunities brought on by COVID-19, including on the use of technology, and young people undoubtedly have been at the forefront of movements and using technology to their advantage. The economic impact is also very present and prevalent. There's an impact on the activism work and the additional barriers. But again, COVID-19 has given a time and space for reflection for many of us, and building new networks and different opportunities has also emerged. The COVID-19 pandemic is also during which the time the Canadian Coalition for Youth, Peace and Security was born. And so we completely understand the relevance and the context in which we live. So thank you all for your contributions to the conversation. These takeaways and recommendations will be shared with you after the session to inform future conversations and efforts to support youth-led action on peace and security and advance and improve the youth peace and security agenda. Those of us who are privileged to be living in non-conflict zones are still living in negative peace. We need youth peace builders to bring us to positive peace. Peace building is the process to get from negative to positive peace, where all of us can thrive equally. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for the Canadian Coalition for Youth, Peace and Security and FHI 360 and all of the wonderful volunteers and organizers, to our wonderful panelists and speakers, to all of you for joining us in celebrating the 5th anniversary of the Youth, Peace, and Security Agenda. We hope you enjoyed this session, and a big thanks to the Alliance for Peace Building and all the organizers of PeaceCon 2020. We're happy to be here and we're happy to have spent the last hour and a half with you. Now spend the rest year and a half or more helping us implement the Youth, Peace, and Security Agenda in all of the communities where we are a part of. Thank you and have a great rest of your day or your evening, wherever you are.